Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to look at a very special person. I mean, we've seen the movie The Last of the Mohicans. We found the last Mohican, the last person in private practice as an internist in the area that we can identify. So why don't we start with an introduction and then learn more about you.
I am Arthur Segalia. I've been in practice in Milford or Hopedale since 1978.
Arthur, am I right that you're the last one?
To the best of my knowledge, I'm the last internist.
So we have to ask a question. Why?
I like working for myself. I like practicing medicine for myself. I enjoy being the person the patient walks in the door to see rather than, XY medical group. They walk in to see me, and I take that as an honor and a responsibility.
Well, I think a lot of us who've been involved in healthcare understand that when we grew up, you had a certain percentage of people that went into medicine for the passion, as you say, of being with patients, taking care of them, and a certain percent that went in because it was a very nice livelihood. I would say most of the second half, the latter group, have found that if you don't have the passion, there's probably other ways you can make money.
Absolutely. Al Cromaldi, who's a gastroenterologist in town, and I went
Been on the show.
Has he really?
Oh,
He's
yes.
a great guy. We went to college together. And I was in a science program. He was in pre-med. And we were both inducted into the Pre-Med Honor Society, and we had a dinner. And he and I were chatting, and we talked about going into medicine. And we both agreed that we didn't go into it for the money. I said, one of the benefits is that you never have to worry about money.
Right.
And that was the last time Al or I didn't worry about money. We just talked, we were out to dinner together the other night, and we just reminisced about that exchange. He told me he remembered it. I think he was telling the truth, but I don't know. I certainly remember it. It's
But today, I mean, it always amazes me because by the time you do your med school, your residency, everything, your subspecialty, feels like you're ready to retire by the time you come out and earn your first dollar. How do new graduates survive?
I have to beg ignorance. I was very fortunate in the sense that when I went to medical school, my tuition per year was under $2,000 a year.
Oh.
So while you didn't make any money to speak of as an intern or as a resident, and that went on for 4 or 5 years, I didn't carry the monumental debt that some of the guys and girls coming out now are facing.
A very close friend of mine years ago, when he graduated, he explained to me that he had to pay off like Holy Cross, like any private school today, in today's dollars, is $60,000.
Right.
So you got $250,000 there. You got a couple $100,000 worth of medical school. So I'm starting at $500,000. Then I want to set up a private practice, in ear, nose, and throat. It says, buy a little house that I can convert. That's another $300,000. And he says, by the time I equip it, I'm close to $1 million in debt before I've made $1. It just amazes me when you start thinking the carrying costs alone. Never mind, he went into it for the passion of being with patients.
Right. I never had that problem. I was fortunate in that I actually had a scholarship in college, and then in medical school it was
You escaped the first big hurdle.
Right. And going in internal medicine, you buy a stethoscope, you buy a desk, you rent or buy an office, and then you're ready to go. It's not like an ophthalmologist or an ear, nose, and throat specialist or a cardiologist. You don't have all this equipment you have to either buy or somehow otherwise get access to.
But now, the second hurdle, paperwork. the admin side of being a physician today. You can't escape that.
No, you can't. You cannot.
I mean, does that take more than a couple minutes a day of your life?
They did a study came out 2 weeks ago that actually quantified the amount of time a physician spends on either doing paperwork or on a computer. It's 50% of their day.
That's amazing.
And part of the problem is that part of that 50% is when you're in the room with the patient. When you're in the room with the patient, you're at a computer screen. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of effort and a lot of reminding yourself that, and I try to do that, is you need to listen to what they're saying and somehow type it and still keep eye contact and let them know, because eye contact is important. You know, if you're staring at a computer screen, you could be on the phone with them for
Right.
as much attention as you're paying.
Well, but plus the image, it's like, hello, I'm here.
And it's so predominantly unnecessary.
Can you get, I mean, my mom used to go to Farouk, Dr. Farouk,
Great guy,
fantastic.
great guy.
He really, you could feel the passion he had.
Oh,
So when I brought my mom in, it was like, I can trust this man.
Oh, absolutely.
know,
Yep.
But he used to have little mini-me's that would be in the room every once in a while. Somehow he got an internist or something,
Yeah, you have to get medical students with him.
medical students, and they would be ticky-tacking away. And we got to actually talk to him the whole time.
Yep, that's great.
You know, we didn't feel like, okay, start, 13.2 minutes.
Yep.
You know, our minutes are going to be up. Mom, don't say anything. Don't talk about the family, because you only have 13.1 minutes left. It was more of a feeling like old school. You know, I mean, you've been in the Milford, Hopedale area long enough. We joke about the fact that when we grew up, the little red building that was the Milford Hospital,
Yep.
there are only 4 physicians that could have brought you into this world.
Yep.
You know, and you still remember the Cicchetti, Mastriani, you know, you go through them all. There was only 4. So today, it seems like we've, by orders of magnitude, increased the services. But the way medicine is being, I guess, forced on physicians, that you don't have the time. You have your 13.2 minutes.
Yeah.
How do you get around that?
Well, when it became evident that that was the case, I terribly disliked that sort of in and out, hand on the door, you know, stay on schedule, you've got 5 patients this hour. It took all the joy out of it, all the pleasure out of it, but it was how you had to do it to make ends meet, to make the income greater than the overhead.
So many physicians come on, Arthur, that have said, I could fill my practice with Medicare, Medicaid, and go out of business within 2 years because I don't get reimbursed enough to keep the doors open.
Right.
How do you balance it?
Well, when it became evident that that was the case, I could either go out of practice or go work for somebody, or I could find a way to make it enjoyable for me, beneficial for the patient, and still profitable. And what we came up with was an idea that was growing at the time of concierge medicine. If you go to, you know, the suburbs of San Francisco, or you go to...
Well, we've seen it on TV. For a mere $10,000 a month or $20,000 a month, Royal Pain shows you they'll come out to your $100 million mansion on call.
Right.
But-
For $10,000 a month, I'll move into your mansion and stay there. You know, but the problem is that this is Hopedale, this is Milford, and that's not the kind of money folks in this area are typically make. So we settled on a much more reasonable $250 a year.
Okay, so an average worker can afford the concierge principle.
If it's worth it to them, they can. You know, is it worth $250 a year, $450 for your family, if you can spend more than 13.2 minutes with me, that when you call the office after hours, the number that you're given is my cell phone number, not a cell phone, my only cell phone number. If you call in the morning and you've got an earache or a bronchitis or whatever, you'll be told to come in that day. We'll see you that day. If you've just got home from the hospital and you are just far too weak to get out of bed and come and see me, I'll come and see you. You know, it's what you're supposed to do.
So now this idea of concierge, Milford style, is that most of the expense is still borne by your traditional insurance, correct?
Yeah, a little more, yeah, 2/3.
Okay, so it's still, I'm not paying the whole,
Oh, no.
because with the kind of money you're mentioning, that doesn't cover a lot of
Doesn't
actual
cover-
expense.
No, right. It's,
So I get the extra little time,
It's
the
a
extra
boost.
special that I pay out of pocket, but I can still use my insurance.
yes.
That's interesting, because I never thought that, a worker could afford concierge level treatment.
I never thought I'd be a concierge doctor, but it's the way it has to be. You know, either that or go out of business.
Well, I mean, you probably have the same needy family like we do, that they want to eat every day, they want clothing, they want a home. So you got to take home some money.
Yes, yes.
People forget that, when you walk out the door, you still have the same responsibilities that everybody else has.
I had one fellow who since passed away. He was a fairly prominent guy in town, intelligent, well-educated, ran a local business that was very successful. And he actually expressed to me the thought that anything I made in the office was just gravy, that I got paid by the hospital to be a doctor in Hopedale.
That would be nice.
It would be nice. It would be very nice. You know, there are those folks who think that when you graduate medical school, you're given this little tree, and you plant it in the backyard of your house, and it grows money.
You just go pull the money off.
And you know, the funny thing is, I wasn't a doctor my whole life. I grew up. I wasn't a doctor till I was 28.
Yeah.
So I thought the same thing. And you can get to be a bit of a spendthrift when all you think of is, I'm a doctor, I can afford this. Because you know what? Sometimes you can't, And it's the downfall of more than a few colleagues
Well,
of mine.
when you look at some of the subspecialty surgeons, and you see heart, lung transplants, and the kind of money that they make, the top 1% of the physicians, if you think everybody's making that kind of money,
Right.
I mean, we ran into it when we had some barristers on, because you hear that first year out of the Harvard Law, they're making $160,000, $180,000,
Right.
and they probably are, that top 1%.
Yeah.
Then you say, okay, the people who are doing your $30 documents as you buy your home probably aren't starting off their first year at that level.
Right. They'll be happy to be making as much as the paralegals are making in the firm.
But the other thing too is I think people don't understand, when you look at malpractice insurance, because I've heard from a lot of the physicians coming on, the reason they don't dare try and start their own practice is by the time they pay their malpractice, pay the admin staff to try it, it's unbearable. They would spend no time with patients or very minimal, and the first few $100,000 of gross revenue would barely cover the overhead.
Right.
How do you get around that? Is it the concierge piece
Yeah,
that
you
helps?
have to. I mean, we had to. We actually would have made no money at all. None. $0 if we didn't institute the concierge practice.
Now, the one thing that, Phil Sermacoli's come on many times, said the hardest thing he has is to find primary care physicians that'll stay. And every practice seems to be, I mean, we were joking before the show where I said my daughter turned 26, and Holliston Peds finally said, it's time, you're no longer a ped, you're 26 years old.
Yep.
But then we turned around and said, how do we find, number one, a primary care physician, but number two, the one of the quality level we want? Because most of those practices were closed.
Yep. My primary physician was Joe Antaki over in Uxbridge, and he made the choice a couple of years ago to go into hospice care and also to do some insurance work, and left his primary care practice. I'm kind of picky, and
Well, you have an insight that we don't.
yeah, but looking around, I found myself looking in Providence, Bristol, Rhode Island.
Wow.
I finally settled on a doctor over in Lincoln who, on paper, looked like he was the kind of guy I could trust. He was well trained, and he had an office that seemed to run very well. And I've been to him a couple of times, and I do like him. But it was not easy finding somebody that, one, was taking new patients, and two, was local. Well, if Lincoln is local. I think that it's almost universal about the generation that's coming out now, millennials minus, that they're not, I mean, those who aren't in medicine are used to working for a company for 3 years and finding
And jumping.
an upward move and taking it. And they're there for 3 years, and they're somewhere else. And that's what they're used to. And I think that's happening with physicians as well, especially in primary care, as Phil has experienced. They're hard to retain. They're given over to moving. And what happens, you see a lot of them making those moves, so that people wind up getting penciled into the shingle and move on, so that it is hard to find and retain.
So now, is your practice one of those that's open?
Open to new patients?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Because that was one of the things to me, the recommendation comes from the soccer field. We always joked that when you're standing on the sidelines,
Yep.
and you say, I have an ache, oh, go see so-and-so. I liked her, or she took good care of me, or he was very good, but half the names, or more than half the names that we kept hearing when my daughter got shoosted. And at 26, I mean, we couldn't complain.
Right.
They held on to her longer than they should have. But we turned around and said, all these practices are, quote, closed, that the physician couldn't take any more patients.
Yeah.
I think that's what, like you say, 2,000 or something?
2,000 is the usual number. I don't know what, some of the practices set as limits, but 2,000 is the
It seems like an
amount.
amazing number.
Well, I mean, if most of them are young, people, you don't see them more than once every year or two.
Okay.
But ours, we have sort of a bimodal practice where we have people, I mean, my patients are, I can spend a day seeing nothing but folks over 85. But we also have an influx of new patients who are much younger, and so we have the young ones and then we have the old ones. And no, we're taking new patients.
But wasn't that the kind of the Achilles heel of this whole universal care aspect? When President Obama told people like my youngest daughter, you can keep your cheap insurance policies.
Yeah. He was lying.
Well, you turn around and say, wait a minute. My mother's 92. When I look at all the meds, all the time she has to go in, there's no way that whatever she's paying for health insurance covers it.
Right.
So somebody's got to pay for it.
Yep. Well, that's the basic concept behind insurance, though.
Yeah. The healthy ones pay in. The young kids pay in because they're going once a year.
Right.
And someday when they get old, hopefully, they then have somebody paying for them. But how does that work? I mean, I keep hearing, that the health care reimbursement rates are strangling especially primary care physicians.
Well, that's where the 13.2 minutes comes from.
Ah.
You have to see more patients per hour to meet targets which have been set by someone else.
So you have an accountant saying to break, I mean, we do this.
Yeah.
You turn around and say, you have to make so many widgets per unit time
Absolutely.
for us to make our gross margin.
Yep.
Problem is, most people aren't standard uniform widgets.
Right. And, you know, even with the, you know, I see 3 patients an hour instead of 5. And every once in a while, like maybe once a day or so, you know, I'll get the knock on the door from my nurse saying, you know, you're half an hour behind. Because I've known these people for 35, 40 years, and I know their kids, and I know their troubles, and I know their triumphs, and
But you've had
we chat about it in addition.
multi-generations stick with you, right?
I have 2 families who I've taken care of 4 generations.
Amazing.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Amazing. Makes it,
You know, I turned 65, I went on Medicare, my daughter got married, I got grandchildren. None of that stuff made me feel old. The day I realized I was now seeing the 4th generation of a family, that is when I felt old.
but proud.
Oh, absolutely. Not only that, even more proud, it's the family of a physician.
Oh. So you got a picky
It
family.
was an honor, you know? It is an honor.
I was going to say, when it hit me, it was when I showed up, got my Dunkin' Donuts, and I saw the price go down, and I said, "Ooh, I'm not going to complain." She goes, "Senior citizens discount." I was like, wait a minute, no.
I went to the car wash and I said, I'd like to get the super special with the senior citizen discount. Do you need to see my license? He says, no, I can tell.
Yeah, in a way you want to say thank
So I
you, in a way you
smacked
want to
him.
smack them. So now, what are the biggest challenges you face?
Staying focused on the patient.
What are the biggest defocusing elements?
Paperwork.
Paperwork.
Then there's paperwork. Perfect example, I was chatting about this with a friend of mine who's a physician. When you go to medical school and you learn how to interview patients and you learn how to examine patients, which is a long process to learn that, there's something called a review of systems. And that is, you need to become familiar with a series of questions that you ask. If somebody has a complaint about their eyes, there's like 6 or 7 questions you're going to want to ask that will adequately encompass most eye problems. And then there's an ear, nose, and throat set of questions. Then there's a GI, a gastroenterology set of questions, and a cardiac set of questions, and a pulmonary set of questions. There must be 70 questions. And that constitutes what's called a review of systems. Now, there's different levels of reimbursement in every insurance company, and those levels are set sort of with Medicare as the leading
You'd always say
authority.
Medicaid was the worst, Medicare was a little better, and then the private practices.
Yeah,
were-
they're sneaking down in there under Medicare these days.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Because when I was doing clinical diagnostics, it was the private practice, or the private insurance payers that you survived on. Because Medicaid,
They're not much different from Medicare anymore.
I was going to say, Medicaid never even covered most of our costs. Medicare was, a little bit, but not much.
Yeah. But in order to get reimbursed, you know, there's a level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 visit. There really need only be 3. There used to be only 3, now there's 5. In order to get above a level 2, you have to do a review of systems on each patient. It's a learning tool. You don't need, if somebody comes in with chest pain and shortness of breath, you don't need to ask them whether they ever have double vision, you know, or how many times a day they move their bowels. That's really not relevant to the very serious problem you're dealing with now. But if you don't either ask, or many people have questionnaires which sort of get you beyond, it makes it legal, but it's not very good, but you don't need to be good because it's not necessary anyway. If you don't have that in the record, that it was done one way or another, you'll get paid less than it cost you to see the patient.
Yeah, I remember reading about some of these physicians that were being brought up for Medicare fraud. And then when you really look behind it, it wasn't that they were doing anything fraudulently. They were just not filling in the right forms.
Right.
So when they billed $50, well, no, if you didn't do the forms, you're only allowed to bill 35. So it always just amazed me.
There was a patient who came to see me. He had formerly been a patient of a fellow who used to practice in town, since passed away, John Semeraro. John was a stickler for detail. And he sent me this patient in consult once because I have some background in cardiology beyond what John had. And I saw the patient and returned a letter to John evaluating what I thought was going on with the patient. And the patient saved a copy of the letter. And when he came to see me as my patient now, he brought me the letter one day. And I have the letter on my bulletin board because it was something truly to be proud of. It was a really good workup with a succinct evaluation of what was going on with this patient. And then I said to myself, if I did this today, I wouldn't get paid. Because it doesn't have all the elements that Medicare thinks it's supposed to have in it. But it was, like I said, it was something that I could look at and be proud of.
But you know, that amazes me that medicine by sociology majors. You know, it's not that there's anything wrong. My daughter's a sociology major.
The
You know, a
suits.
political science major.
The suits.
But you know, you sit there and say, when you mix science, and I consider medicine still a science, because it's not something I can have a checklist and say, if you answer yes, go this, so I don't need a real physician. I can just go through the boxes.
Right.
When I start seeing defensive medicine, which drives me crazy, because we used to get so many diagnostic tests being run,
Yep.
just because the physician was covering himself or herself. I just sit there and say, there's got to be a better way when you talk about cost reduction. If you want to take cost out of the system, make it more efficient.
Look at an emergency room visit. I have the greatest respect for the ER guys at Milford. They are a terrific group.
Jeff Hopkins is just such, I mean, I love him.
Yep,
You can
all of
feel.
them. All of them that I know. There's new ones now because it got so big.
Yeah.
I don't know some of the younger guys, but you know, Jeff Hopkins, Bob Shrebnick, the Julian Kadishes, those guys, they can take care of me or my family any day. But you look at what they have to do because they're seeing somebody they've never met before, and they have no idea what else might be going on with this patient. So they spend literally thousands of dollars with an MRI for a headache and silly stuff, silly but expensive. And you know, I have the pleasure and the opportunity, if I know this person, and I can take a good history and do a good examination, I can forego some of that stuff because I know the other stuff about them.
But now, can you? I mean, I'm thinking I come into you and I say, oh, really got a problem. And you know dang well I've had that same complaint about my knee for 5 or 6 years. You've looked at it every year and nothing's changed. But now, to protect yourself, do you not have to then go the defensive medicine route and do all these silly tests that you know the answer?
I'm not going to lie to you and say I don't do them. I do some of them.
Okay.
But the other thing I do is just pay my malpractice premium. That's what it's for. You know, that's what it's there for. So I don't have to do silly stuff. The on-the-fence stuff, the guy's got terrible back pain, but I know he'd never have surgery. Do I want to get an MRI? The guidelines say if you're not going to consider surgery, you don't get an MRI. It's not going to tell you anything you can't already tell. But the guy is in pain, he's in agony, he's worried, he's scared. Is this cancer? Well, no, it's not cancer, but you know,
Sure.
does he need to know? So I'll get an MRI.
But see, that's the kind of thing that, I mean, realistically, I mean, if you screw up, you're human. You know, last time I looked, I didn't see any physician with a big red S on their chest. They're going to make mistakes. And I think about it and say, okay, so if you made a mistake, there ought to be enough money to take care of that patient for whatever mistake. But I really sit there and shake my head and say, we're doing so much in defensive medicine that you dang well know that is useless. You know the answer. If that money could be put back in the system,
Yep.
then I start thinking, hey, we could make the fundamental root cause decisions that we need to make medicine more affordable, and maybe you can have 14.2 minutes. Yeah, I don't understand sometimes everything that, physicians are forced to go through just to cover themselves.
Yeah, and it's how much risk you're willing to take. And I don't mean risk like risk the patient's
No.
well-being. I'm talking about risk that, you're dealing with a fluke situation here, and somebody's going to ask you somewhere down the line why you didn't get a cardiac catheterization
But
or
isn't that
whatever.
the fundamental question? Prove to me you'll never trip when you walk. I mean, how do you prove that? Doctor, could you tell me that if you had gotten 438 tests, one of them couldn't have tipped you off? You could never prove the negative.
Right. But physicians sometimes forget that the standard is, what would most reasonable physicians in your situation do? That's the standard for malpractice. Now, with a jury,
No.
it could be, these are the ones that, the CAT scan stole my psychic powers. You're going to get those jury decisions.
Well, sure, you are a very wealthy, set person, and here's this poor
Yeah,
widow.
Plus, and he's got malpractice insurance.
Yeah, and you're not going to pay it anyway.
Right.
I remember when fellow who had his boat at the next doctor's ours had his neighbors over, and the neighbor just slid off the combing and fell. Next thing he finds out, 4 days later, he's being sued for back pain. And he was like, well, we spent the whole weekend after you slipped on your bum. You were up and down on the boat, and, oh, I'm not suing you, I'm suing your insurance company. It won't affect you. And I sit there and say, seriously?
It is very personal. It is very personal.
I mean, you've got to feel personal that I'm telling you, you screwed up.
Yep.
But then financially, I mean, if I get into a car accident, that's my fault. You can't say, yeah, the insurance company paid it off, but it won't affect me.
I was sued once. Won hands down. But I had to spend a week in court.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't tell my staff, I'm in court, you can go home.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay you this week.
Yeah, tell not going to pay the taxes, not going to pay the rent, not going to turn the lights on, we're going to shut the phones off.
Not going to pay the mortgage.
So you lost a good chunk of income just to be right. So it's sort of a Pyrrhic victory when you get sued and win.
Yeah, because you can't go back for a frivolous suit, or you can't sue the patient.
No. You can't, and in most cases you don't want to.
No.
because- In most cases.
Now, a normal day, what takes up most of a concierge practice's time?
Still paperwork.
So half the time you're
I
doing...
start seeing patients at 1 o'clock on a late day, like today.
All right, that's half the day's gone.
Well,
So you're having coffee the whole time beforehand?
I start seeing patients when I get to the office on a late
Right,
day
but that's my
around
point.
10:30, 11 o'clock, and it's all paperwork.
So you're spending almost
Like
half
a
your
stack
day...
of paperwork like that, and I'm pretty good at paperwork, as I think as physicians go. After I get through that whole pile of paperwork for 1 o'clock to start seeing patients, people are still bringing in more paperwork into my basket, so I'm doing paperwork in between patients too.
Wow.
Everybody needs something signed, so it's signed. Most of what I sign, doesn't matter whether I sign it or not, it's already been done.
Do you agree this should have been done? Whether I do or not, I
He
should have...
signed these orders from last month. What if they're wrong?
Yeah,
You're
last
gonna
month I
undo
had
it?
a chance.
You're going to undo it?
Right. Last month I had a chance to affect it. At this point, what do you want me to say? It's
I got
done.
a letter today from, I won't mention their name, but their initials are United Healthcare. My favorite. This letter was in English, but I have no idea what it said. We received a letter relative to your care enhancement project. And I don't know what that is.
I was going to say, am
Something
I
I
the
should
only
know
one?
what it is. No. And it went on in words after words. I have no idea. Literally, I had no idea what it said. I took a picture of it. It's on my phone. I had no idea what it said. And then you turned it over. They offered to say it to you in Hmong or Swahili or
Okay, if I can't
Arabic.
understand it in my primary language, it's like when people talk and you don't understand English, I'll talk louder. You know, if you can't figure it out in English, I'll give it to you in 4
I can
languages.
tell the story because I am Italian American. I had a patient come to me when I first went into practice. Old Italian guy came with his, I don't know, neighbor, friend, son, who was going to translate. And they came in the room, they sat down, and I forget how I started, but I finally got around. I said, "Do you have any chest pain?" The guy looked at me like, "What did I say?" And the guy, his translator, says, "Do you have any chest pain?"
Oh my God.
And that was the translation.
So,
Swear.
demographic-wise, half over 80, half under 30 is.
I should know that, shouldn't I?
Well,
But
gut
I
feel.
don't. I would say over 80.
Over 70, I mean,
Over 80 is easier because that's where the big,
yeah, in small numbers, but lots of attention.
30%,
Wow.
I'd say. My oldest patient is 78. That's 98. I have several patients over 90.
So now, do most of, obviously, the young kids go to the pediatric? I mean, we never knew. We started off at Halston Peds. We stayed with it,
Yeah, I mean, you go to
a pediatrician.
pediatrician till you're 18, till you go to college. That's usually when,
Oh, is that?
that seems to be the time when people, I get more males than females, just because I'm a male. I think girls at that age probably it'll be sufficient just to begin to see a gynecologist.
Yeah, no
They don't need an
OB/GYN.
internist. But college seems to be the time when they make the transition. If there's a problem, you know, somebody's had their blood pressure and it's been high 7 times, they'll bring him in earlier. I'll start seeing him at age 17 or 16.
Oh my God.
Although that's not such a great idea because those kids that age with high blood pressure have a whole different set of issues to look at, which, you know, sometimes a pediatrician is better at looking at those issues than somebody with high blood pressure at 23, 24. But I'd say 30% are over 80. Maybe another 30% between 60 and 80.
So now I'm seeing the institutions try and deal with the need for primary care by setting up acute centers. You know, all of a sudden, you're seeing them pop up everywhere. I mean, our
Yeah.
hospital's putting in one in Hopkinton, one in Milford, and one somewhere else.
Right.
Is that to deal with the fact that when I call my primary care, I'm told, come in next month?
I think so. I would think so.
'Cause-
You know, we don't do that. You know, we come in today. It's late in the day, come in tomorrow morning. But we try to accommodate people unless somebody's having a really serious problem. They're terribly short of breath all of a sudden. They're getting chest pain. They're bleeding. You know, then you go to the ER. That's where you need to go. I'll let people walk in, and we don't turn walk-ins away. You know, it doesn't mean we want people to walk in.
Right.
We don't turn them away, and they'll come in with some pretty hairy stuff, and they'll say, you really need to go to the ER. I don't want to, I want you to see me. Okay, we'll see you. But
But you've got to be limited in what you can.
but we can at least make a diagnosis.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
You know, get the ball rolling. But that'll happen, and it's.
But I keep seeing everywhere, you're starting to get these centers where the insurance companies are making you very aware that they don't want you going to the ER unless you have to. You know, with the $250 and $500 deductibles. I mean, that one visit cost me more than I'd have a concierge.
Right,
I
exactly.
mean, you think
That's
about
right.
one visit to the ER.
Yep.
But, you know, these acute centers seem to be giving a lot of what you're saying, that, hey, I need to come in. I can pop in, or I can go at lunch, or...
I think a lot of physicians, or whoever makes those decisions, don't realize that people can be fit in. You know, yes, you have slots or you don't have slots, but you know, they're not in stone. You
Yeah.
can make do. You know, you're going to see somebody that day who really only needs 13 minutes.
Right.
You know, and they may be the same person that took 45 minutes last time. It all evens out.
You can probably squeeze one in here or
Yeah.
there. If,
Come on, bend a little, you know.
so now, the bulk of the appointments, is it just well care, or is it sick patients?
We do a lot of preventive stuff. What do I mean by preventive? I mean keeping your cholesterol under control, keeping your blood pressure under control. If you're diabetic, maintaining a good blood sugar.
How did you diagnose me so quickly?
I mean, those three are, you know, probably a good 75% of my practice. But I'll start a day, I always get nervous. I'm afraid I'm losing too many patients, you know. So I'll walk in one morning and there'll be 4 open slots. And I'll say, oh my God, you know, that's, among other things, that's a profit margin, you know,
Right.
4 slots. You know, I go see the first patient and enough people have called that needed to be seen that filled all those
Boom,
slots.
it's all
Yeah,
full.
it's all full. So someday I'll learn to not worry about that, but not yet. I'm still a kid.
But, you know, still, you bring up open slots. If you want to, I mean, let's face it, my darling bride wants to go to Penn State this weekend. I'm taking a couple days. I'm still getting paid.
Who are they playing?
Ohio State? I don't know. I'm not even going to the
I got a whole
game.
family in New Jersey that go to Penn State, so they're fanatics down there.
I got in trouble because I learned what you don't say. They used to have a statue of Joe Paterno, these people putting flowers.
Yeah.
I looked at my darling bride, I said, where do you get the Kool-Aid? People around me did not like it.
Did she go to Penn State?
Oh, yes.
They're crazy, aren't they?
Oh, happiest valley. And then I'm in the souvenir. They have an entire store. And I looked, I said, is there anything in this town that doesn't have this dang pussycat on it? Some little old lady, I mean, must have been 70-some years old, starts doing a Ruth Buzzy on me, taking her purse and whacking me, yelling at me, it's a lion, it's a Nittany. What can you do?
What is a Nittany lion?
It's a mountain lion from Mount Nittany, which is a mountain in Happiest Valley, in the Happy Valley.
All right, now I know.
I didn't know. But at that point, I did the only thing I could think of, is I hid behind my wife. So, I mean, I'm going away for 2 days. I still get paid. You know, everything stays. But that's very different from a physician's practice. When you go away, the mortgage stays, but the income stops.
Right. Well, you have to take vacations. You have
Well-
to go away. It's part of it.
But I mean, but even when I want to go home an hour early or 2, I get to do it.
Right. As I've gotten older, and I have gotten older, I cut down my hours so that I probably work in the office probably less than 40 hours a week, significantly less. And, you know, I'll be home because I have the morning off, and the phone will ring. It'll be
Well,
my
I
nurse.
notice you don't let that thing too far away from you.
Never, never. Home, away, on vacation, it's always there. And that's okay. I mean, somebody calls me, it's Joe. I know Joe. You know, I know he's not going to call me if it's not a problem. And my patients do not call me with silly stuff. I don't know what it is. I think maybe it's just that we have a relationship. They're not going to bug me if they don't have to.
Well, I mean,
And I don't yell at them when they call,
I was going to say,
usually.
I don't want to abuse it, you know, the boy who cried wolf,
Right.
because I want you to take my call.
And it's a phone call. You know, calm down. It's not the end of the world. It didn't ruin your day. It's a phone call. It could have been worse. It could have been a marketing call, you know? So you have to be flexible. You have to be flexible. It's not the end of the world.
So we hear about universal health care, Obamacare. Is it working?
You know, I don't know, because I think a lot of it hasn't been enacted yet. I think that some of the costs have been driven up by unnecessary mandates. Everybody's got to have such and such in their insurance policy, whether they use it or not. So the insurance rates go up. I think that the worst thing about healthcare, and whether Obamacare has driven it or not, I'm not competent to say, are high deductibles. I think people should have co-pays that have a little bit of sting in them, so that if you come in with the knee that's hurt for 8 years, and you tell me you want an MRI, and I tell you you probably don't need it, and you want to get it anyway, well, it's not a freebie for you.
Right.
By the same token, if you come in with back pain and it's going down your leg and your leg is going numb and you're getting weak and falling, you have to have an MRI. And if you haven't met your deductible, you're paying for that whole MRI yourself. And you're going to fight back. You're going to push back. And you might not get the MRI that you really need to have because you've got a high deductible. If you had a reasonably high, little bit of a pain, copay, then I could talk you into it and you'd get what you need.
Well, I mean, when you start talking about $4,000 deductibles,
Ridiculous.
you know, a person, you know, you'd say making 40, 50 grand a year. That's a nice salary.
It's a lot of money to
$4 grand
fork over.
net out of that.
That's right.
Holy, that's a month's pay.
Yep. And it's wrong. Copays, fine. You know, adjusted to income, fine. But deductibles of, you know, thousands of dollars, it's just wrong. It's counterproductive. It's unnecessary. Copays would accomplish the same thing. You know, and what happens is patients who are intimidated, quite understandably, by their deductible, fight tooth and nail not to get anything done for as long as they can. But when the end of the year has come, they've paid out their $4 grand and their insurance company's paid nothing. And then their rates go up because it's another year and rates go up every year. You know, it doesn't make any sense. It's wrong.
But, you know, this whole idea of universal health care, I mean, I always laughed because I said, if somebody shows up to the emergency room sick, you know, Jeff Hopkins will be the first one to say, I don't know what credit card they have. I don't care.
Right.
You know, the minute they come through that waiting room, it
I
doesn't.
have never heard, I don't work in an ER, so I may have missed it. I've never heard of somebody being turned away because they can't pay. I've never heard of somebody not being admitted because they can't pay. I've never heard of it. Maybe it's happened.
Yeah.
Maybe it happened someplace else. I've not heard of it happening at Milford.
I can't imagine, but you know, you hear so much. The debate went on about the kids that came from Texas, put in Milford, you know, that hit the border, and the federal government located them here. And you hear so many people saying, well, you should have just turned them away. I sit there and say, seriously? And it's so easy on paper.
Right, it doesn't happen. At least I don't think it happens.
I'd like to see the Milfordian or a person from Hopedale who would be on the border and have a sick little kid come up and say, Mister, please help me, and they'd turn their back.
Right.
Never going to happen. Never mind a physician who's sworn an oath and put their life into do no harm. You know, so I guess the concept, right, wrong, or indifferent, just to me meant instead of making people wait till they had a real illness, you deal with them up front. Kind of like you're saying preventative.
Right.
Another hot topic, prescribing, writing scripts. How is that affecting you now? I mean, this whole opioid thing seems to be
Well, as of
painting
October-
everybody with a broad brush,
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty stingy with narcotics and drugs like that.
as you should be.
We have to have people will sign a contract and they'll re-sign it every 3 months, that they're going to use what they say they're using. They're not going to get these from anybody else. What else is in the contract? Those are the main points. I mean, that
They're not going to
they're
Rhode
not gonna-
Island to have it filled, New Hampshire.
And they're not going to, say, we're not going to have this begging session every 3 months. Please give me more. They're not. If they use a few more during that month period, then they're going to have a few less to get to the end of the month. That's the deal, and it works pretty well, I think. You have to make a judgment call. Does this person really have enough pain to warrant this medication? I usually guess right. Sometimes I guess wrong. Usually I guess wrong in giving the medication, not withholding it. Hopefully not too often.
But yeah, I'm seeing the reaction to the physician in South Carolina who was prescribing 1,000 oxys.
How'd that happen? I mean, didn't the pharmacist
Well, I was going to say,
turn them in? I mean,
Arthur, you can write as many scripts as you want. You can't dispense anything,
right.
right? So
Right.
if you're writing willy-nilly, 10 tablets a day for me or 20, well, when Rite Aid fills them, isn't there a kind of like a check and balance that they're going to say, wait a minute?
And we'll have, just to be clear, it's not a HIPAA violation because it has to do with operations and treatment. But if somebody comes to me and says, I mean, there's a classic, it only happens to new physicians. And it happened to me years ago. Somebody comes into your office at lunch hour without an appointment, and it's okay, they don't mind, they'll wait because they've got a terrible migraine headache. And they had a pill, usually Percocet, that worked for the headache. Please don't give me any Vicodin. I'm allergic to Vicodin. Don't give me any Vicodin, but I'll take some Percocet if you don't mind. And it's like, you have to say, do you know this is not original? Do you know this is a routine that I've seen 6 times before?
Yeah.
That aside, you can pick up the phone and call the pharmacist and say, listen, I've got so-and-so here. What do you know about him? And he'll say, I know he's been to 4 different doctors in the last month and gotten Percocet prescriptions from every one of them. It's okay, thank you.
So it's not a HIPAA, but realistically,
It's not a HIPAA.
the compliance, and when you do a trending assay and you say, okay, internists in the area, average X. Joe is 4X. Maybe there's a good reason, but if nothing else, go check.
Well, the state has a tool in place which is unnecessarily cumbersome. I mean, I don't know how we're going to be able to use it, but we're supposed to be using it as of October 15th.
Every 3 days you have to.
You have to go online and put all this demographic stuff in about the patient, and they'll compare it to other prescriptions in the state plus any other states that they're working with or states you specify. Somebody comes from Texas, you can check Texas, and they'll look in Texas too. It's sort of over the top. I'm skeptical because it's one more incursion into that commodity I have next to nothing of anymore,
Time.
which is time. Usually you can do it other ways, less formally.
But
But we'll see how it works.
If I have a legitimate need, I mean, I was scared to death when I was playing hockey and I broke my leg off. Yeah, I got some painkillers. I remember 90% of them I didn't bother with. One, I was manly man. I can live through the pain.
That's
But
right.
the other thing was I was scared to death when I'm reading.
Yeah.
That, oh my God, by accident I could get hooked on this stuff. But you sit there and say, no.
Most people don't get hooked by choice or by accident, deliberately. They
I was
use
gonna
by
say,
accident.
realistically, my physician knew me, and he wasn't going to overprescribe. But if I needed them, really needed them, you're putting a heck of a burden not only on you on time, but if you can only prescribe, was it 3 days at a time to me?
I think it's 7 now.
Or 7?
Yeah.
So every week, I have to make a new appointment?
Yep. But no, that'd be silly. We have to at least, you have to notify us that you need more, and we'll give you the prescription. Now, that happens 3 or 4 times. We're going to say, come back in, let's see what's really going on. But you can't drag somebody in once a week to get their pain medication.
No, but if you don't drag me in, it's still taking your time to go in and ticky, put everything in.
Right. Well, and part of that is the problem, is the dichotomy between physicians and, say, attorneys or accountants. If I call up my attorney and I want to have a chat with them, I'm going to get a bill.
Yeah,
as I
cha-ching.
should. Somebody calls me up and we're on the phone for an hour working something out that, well, they really didn't need an office visit, but needed an hour to talk about it.
Really?
Nothing, zero. There's
So-
no such thing.
So
as
if you're trying to
billable
cover
hours.
your overhead, you're going to bring them in. If you say, oh, I'm going to need 30, 40 minutes, you're going to force me to come in because
Right,
otherwise.
which is a waste of your time and imposition on you. It would make much more sense to do it over the phone. And some insurance companies will even tell you, they've got a code for telephone consult. Try sending it in.
Oh,
It's rejected. Or they said, what's the pay for this? Oh, there's no pay for it. You just record what you did.
oh, that's
Zero.
nice. Do I get to eat tonight? No.
Think about eating. Eating's never been a problem.
So now, if I wanted to find out more, do I Google concierge medicine in Hopedale, Milford, or how would I find you?
Well, we're at 54 Hopedale Street. But we have meet and greet visits. They're free. You know, I've had a couple this week. Patients will come in, find out more meet me, see how I treat them, see how my staff treats them. Let me tell them what we can and can't do for them. And then they make a choice.
Well, what would I Google?
I have no idea.
So I put your name in,
Put my name in, yeah, you'll get
and how do I spell it?
SGALIA, just like it sounds.
It's amazing when we start thinking about all of the high-tech treatments, the Dana-Farber Center, everything we've done that's available. Sometimes we forget that it all starts with not being rushed in 13.2 minutes. And you know, you look on TV and you see the mansions of the Hamptons, and the TV show talks about concierge medicine only for the uber wealthy. Kind of nice to know that you can have a little bit of that right here in Milford at a price that most of us who are working people can afford. So thank you.
Thank you.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a healthier night than tonight. Good night.
Not too long since I've been home.